Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. I am your host, Craig Fowler, and we are back with our second What a Season That Was podcast. This time looking at the 2000-2001 Scottish football campaign, and helping me to go through the big highlights from that season is Craig Cairns.
Hello.
And Andy Harrow.
Hello.
Hello guys, good to have yous on. Right, this one is going to be a bit more top flight heavy, I think, than the last one. Firstly, we are lacking the expertise of a Sean McGuigan, who was on the last show. But to be fair, I did message Sean and say, this season, anything worth talking about from the lower leagues, anything I can do a bit of a deep dive on myself, or that Andy can maybe do a deep dive on. And he came back basically saying, no, not really. Nothing really much happened. It was all that interesting in the lower leagues this season. The most interesting thing was a title race between Hamilton and Cowdenbeath. But if you listened to the last time we'd done one of these, then that was already mentioned. So not a lot to really go with in the lower leagues. But there was plenty from the Scottish Premier League. I was going to call it Scottish Premiership. Not true at the time. Not true at the time. The Scottish Premier League.
I made the same mistake in the first one, Craig. Tripped over myself at the start. Like, what are we calling this?
Which had its first ever season of the split, the much contentious split that is appreciated, I think it's fair to say, by the majority of the people, if not all the people on the Terrace podcast, but is disliked by the majority of Scottish football fans, I think in general, who just don't like the idea of anything kind of gimmicky, I would say, in the top flight. And also, it's also a means of it being there and getting clubs the funds they need without it being like a bigger league. And there's that debate that goes on for ages that clubs don't like playing the same teams 4 times a season, want a bigger league, but with the size of clubs in Scotland and the fact that you don't get as many places for Europe as some other leagues, and there's not a whole lot. If you're going to have an 18-team top flight, there's not going to be a whole lot behind that league. So it's like Arbroath would be like a top flight team this season, for instance, and there was a reason we got rid of bigger leagues at one point, and if we ever brought them back, we'd probably just get rid of them again because it wouldn't be very good. But this was the league of the first introduction of the split. And before I throw it to you guys, there was there was an article I saw which I just wanted to kind of read out. It was from Alex McLeish, who wasn't a fan of the split, but the reason why is because he thought it would bring out more negative thinking amongst football managers. So let me read out his quotes. It says, finishing in the bottom half of the table for the last 5 games when the cup comes on is effectively the same as being relegated. That means the fear football we're all trying to avoid will start long before then as teams try to avoid upsetting their fans. They are likely to have the patience for explorations and jobs will be at risk. I've let players like X, Y, and Z go this summer. If I've messed up, I'm well aware of the consequences could be dire because of the new league setup. I think Alex was maybe going a wee bit OTT there with the potential downsides of a split. What do you reckon, Craig?
I think there was probably other factors coming over the hill for Rangers that were going to be dire from them.
Oh, sorry, he was Hibs manager at the time.
Oh, okay, sorry. That's, yeah, okay. Well, is that maybe just an insight into his own thinking and how he was going to... Of course, Dick Advocaat was manager of Rangers at this point, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah, it was. There's Advocaat's final full season. McLeish would join the campaign after.
I'm ill today. I had COVID when I did the first one of these, so could I request not being on the third one?
Do you think it's some sort of jinx that makes
some sort of curse? Some sort of curse, yeah. But yeah, that's just because I didn't really look at Hibs much for the season. I mean, to pick up to something that you said earlier, I think it's very Rangers and Celtic focused. It's not just Scottish Premiership focused. Certainly a lot of the things that we're going to talk about. So I didn't really look at Hibs too much for this. But yeah, now that you've said it, of course he wasn't Rangers manager because this was like the high spending Rangers and Dick Advocaat. But yeah, I wonder whether that was an insight into his thinking. That is a bit dramatic. It never sort of, since it's played out, I can maybe understand that view before it's come in and it's foreign, like calling it relegation. But after the fact, I don't think anybody's seriously saying it feels like you've been relegated because you can finish with you can finish within a whisker of being in it, and then your games become dead rubbers. And I think that's maybe more of an issue than feeling like you've been relegated or whatever. And the financial impact for some teams that sort of budget for it as well. But I do think that you're right about most people on the terrace being in favour of it. But I think it was maybe Sean that said a couple of weeks ago, I think most people are maybe of the opinion that it's the lesser of a few evils, if you like, because and there is still issues that probably could be addressed with the fixture imbalance that happens after it, and having to go somewhere 3 times and somewhere else once, and it never seeming to impact certain teams and that kind of thing. So there are issues with it still, but yes, I think it's still probably it retains the excitement towards the end of the season, and unless you do something completely innovative and have like playoff positions for European places or something, or extend relegation playoffs along with that and have a bigger league, then yeah, I think we're okay with what we have. We go on about the excitement it creates pretty much every season. So yeah.
Yeah. McLeish actually went on to say if anybody had actually bothered to ask me what I thought, it's like, bloody hell, mate, you're managing Hibs, calm down. Then I would have gone for splitting the league
to
after.
Your chairman.
Yeah, exactly. I would have gone for splitting the league after 22 games. That would give everyone in the top flight a total of 36 games a season. I would put the top 8 into a setup which decides the Championship UEFA Cup places, and the bottom 4 would then join the top 4 in the first division. Well, that's actually relegation. Finishing in the bottom 6 isn't the relegation. That feels a lot more like relegation and maybe a lot more negative football, because, I mean, to finish in the top 6, it's hard to draw your way there, for instance. It's hard to get 0-0 every week and finish 6th in the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Mickey Mellon managed it. Sorry,
no, hang on. I think Dundee United finished 8th that year.
No, did they? Sorry.
Tab Court's team finished 4th.
Oh, okay, right. Sorry, Andy.
No, that's all right. No, I mean, I think generally it's you know, it sounds a really obvious cliche, but if you finish 6th, you get there in merit after the number of games that you play. It's not a fluke to get into 6th place, and it's that, you know, you get that weird statistical anomaly where sometimes the team finishing 6th ends up with less points than the teams in 7th and 8th, but in the grand scheme of things, so what? That doesn't really matter. They're obviously playing harder teams at the end of the season. And no, I think it's interesting, some of these, when you look back on those type of stories, and you see that actually there's really been no particular issue with the split the whole way through. It'd be generally just sort of accepted as a thing that works all right now. And I mean, they could always change it, and it probably again wouldn't make that much difference, but it certainly wasn't the massive negative that McLeish was painting it out to be.
As Craig said, this season was very much top-heavy in terms of the Old Firm, and we will talk about them a little bit to begin with. But there's 2 games in particular I'm going to focus on, but I'll go to you first of all, Craig, because I know you're focusing on the amount of money spent by the clubs at the very top of Scottish football for the season. It certainly worked out for Celtic. They splashed out some big fees, and they ended up winning not only the title but the treble, and really romping to the title, 97 points in the end. Well, to win the League Cup and the Scottish Cup. Rangers spent big money, but they finished a distant 15 points behind. And that came despite making the most expensive transfer for a player coming in, and it still remains to this day in Scottish football history.
And despite inflation and how wild the market south of the borders got, that would still be an eye-popping transfer fee if Rangers, or Celtic for that matter, were to pull that out for someone today. It is. You're right. It is. This is sort of Celtic and Rangers focused. I think give each of them their due in a minute, but I wanted to go through a couple of the other ones just to give a flavour of what was going on. It wasn't the wildest season for the other teams outside Scottish football, outside of Rangers and Celtic and Scottish football, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There were a few exceptions to that. I think either side of these seasons, there's examples of some teams maybe spending a bit. So, for instance, Hearts are one of the teams that kind of reined in this season, but before that, in the seasons leading up, they had wasted money on the likes of Gordon Petric, who was released around this time. So yeah, but some of the ones that were Kevin Nicol signing for Hibs. It was six-figure fee. That remains one of the biggest fees Wraiths ever brought in for a player. Dunfermline were shelling out 6 figures for the likes of Barry Nicholson, Andreas Skerla, and Yusuf Rossi. And Yusuf Rossi, off the top of my head, I remember him getting like a wild red card in a game or something like that. But they got quite a lot out of those other two. But I don't think Rossi was really up to much. And maybe the wildest one I found was Dundee United paying St Johnstone 600 grand for Danny Griffin. Remember Danny Griffin?
Yeah, vaguely.
Very good on Football Manager as a youngster. Was a very, very good player to sign when he was at St Johnstone. Dundee United tried it in real life and it didn't really work out. But yeah, as Fowler kind of led with, the headlines are really Rangers and Celtic. I think Celtic's one's kind of justified by the results. Not only, you mentioned the treble, but not only that, this team goes on to the UEFA Cup final and performs well in a UEFA Cup final against a budding Jose Mourinho and his Porto side that would go on to win the Champions League. So yeah, their outgoings kind of were justified in the end. Rangers is less so. So Celtic brought in Chris Sutton. He was kind of like a big money flop at Chelsea. So that was a wee bit of a risky signing given the money they spent on him.
Neil Lennon, £10 million. I think he only scored once for Chelsea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was off the back of him winning the league with Blackburn and being Shearer's partner. Yeah, Neil Lennon cost a fair whack. Yusuf Al-Haran, Alan Thompson, Rab Douglas cost a wee bit, and then they got a wee bargain in Didi Erga. And then there was a guy called Fernando de Ornelas, who they got on loan from Zaragoza or something like that, who I have no recollection of at Celtic or otherwise. But yeah, those were the players that they brought in. As I said, it's kind of justified in the end with what they went on to do. Rangers, 12 million on Andre Flo, scores on his debut. We're going to speak a wee bit about that later. Doesn't really have a good first season, but then I was going to say lives up to the price tag of the second season. I don't think any amount of goals would have lived up to the price tag. This was David Murray sort of living up to his, if Celtic spend a fiver, I'll spend a tenner kind of thing, or for every £5 they spend, because £5 isn't that much. So yeah, he said for every £5 they spend, we'll spend £10, and this was it in action, along with Bert Konterman, and then there was some other better signings like Ronald De Boer, Fernando Rickson, Kenny Miller, Peter Lovenkrands, and then kind of varying ones like, Jesper Crispinson was just a backup keeper, wasn't he? And Marcus Gale. So, and there's a few others that if you go through, there's lots of kind of free transfers at other teams. There was, like I say, as I said earlier, there was a few teams that were maybe spending quite a lot either side of this, but not in this season, like Kilmarnock and Hearts. But you do look at some of the free transfers and stuff, and there's going to be some like wages getting chucked about there as well. So, yeah, it was kind of speaking quite flippantly about it at times there, but it did kind of bring with it years later administrations, a liquidation. There was a lot of bad that came from this kind of period of spending.
Yeah, this was the time before the Scottish Football Sky bubble was about to pop, and it popped in a way that Scottish football clubs saw what was happening, saw what had happened already, and what was continuing to happen in English football with the amount of money that Sky was putting in the game, and now that helped the product grow and kind of became a self-perpetuating cycle in a positive way. But then Sky had kind of taken over rule of Scottish football, and the clubs were like, okay, the same's going to happen to us, so let's just spend this cash, because they were loaning all this money off the bank. The bank were happy to loan them it, because it was like, well, we're going to get this money back. We'll just see what's happening in Sky. And then when it comes to the time to renew the contract, Sky are like, no, we're not going to give you. I don't have it in front of me. I didn't look it up for this, but Sky were basically like, we're not going to give you much of an increase, or we're actually going to take it down, because Sky, well, they were getting decent figures for Celtic and Rangers games, and this is what ended up when Scottish football eventually went back to Sky. This is just what ended up happening all the time. It was at Celtic football away games, because those are the ones that bring in the biggest audience. They were looking at games like between some of the less fancy clubs and only getting like 20,000 people watching, and went, well, there's no point in us ploughing lots of money into this. There's just not going to be the market there, other than 2 teams that are, a handful at the very most. And then that was when the whole reject Sky's offer, try to do the SPL TV thing, that ends up in the mud. And then the BBC come in with a contract to basically give the club some money. And that was when the bank started going, oh, we don't like how this is going. We'd like some of our money back, please. And then it just basically shit hit the fan very quickly. But it's funny what you say about Tore Andre Flo as well, because he is a player in Scottish football that his entire, and it's true at the time and it's true still now, he's kind of thought of as a joke figure and as a flop. He scored 43 goals in 87 games. Now, his all-round play wasn't great, and that made up a lot of it as well. But still, for a goal every 2 games, typically that would still player be looked upon as not bad. Like, at the very least, not bad. Like, it's a decent goal-scoring rate. But it was because of that fee, and it was always because of that fee, that he was expected to do more with that. He was expected to score a goal every game. Either that or be the best player in the park every game. And he did neither of those.
He was a 12 million signing for a team that finished 15 points behind the champions. So I think that sort of tarnishes what came after a bit more, I think. Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't even the highest scoring Norwegian in the league. 5 or 6 goals. So, yeah.
Who was? Should it be obvious?
No, it was Arnold Stavrum.
Oh, there you
go. He got 17. Arnold Stavrum, who's in my, who's probably one of the most famous names in my very unfamous phone book.
All right,
but because I had to find him for the Terrace.
Oh,
for that,
of course,
that
written off.
He was very nice. I did that video. He seemed like a very nice guy. But it's interesting that idea that. I mean, in some ways, it makes sense that the Scottish football thought it would just do the same as the English Premiership when it came to we'll just keep getting more and more money for what we're doing, but then sort of undercut by Craig saying that Dundee United spent 600,000 on Danny Griffin. It's like it's not really comparable, is it? There's always going to be a ceiling when that's a level of person that you're buying for with all your gains, your riches.
Yes, quite. Okay, right. Shall we move on? I was going to say one final thing on Tore Andre Flo before we move on. Rangers did get a lot of their money back. He went for, I think it was $8.5 million to Sunderland in 2002. This was Sunderland. This was the dying days of Peter Reid when he was trying to regenerate the Niall Quinn and Kevin Phillips model that had worked so well for him. Big guy, little guy up front. And so he signed Tore Andre Flo. And I think it was Marcus Stewart. Let me just check that. Yep, Marcus Stewart in the same season. He only lasted until October, and Sunderland finished rock bottom of the Premier League and were relegated. So yeah, that didn't go too well.
Poor Tory. What a terrible name as well, Tory.
Not good at the time. Aged even worse.
Yeah, don't think I even realised at the time.
Right, I'm going to talk about a couple of 6-2 victories here, and I'll start off with one kind of on the theme. Celtic thumping Rangers 6-2 in what was dubbed the demolition derby at Celtic Park. This one was early in the season. Rather bizarrely, this game finished 6-2 to Celtic, and in the very next fixture between the sides, Ibrox finished 5-1 to Rangers. So it's just a couple of back-to-back absolute pumpings going on there. But this was, watching back highlights of this one, it's a rare instance of Celtic getting a dodgy goal in an Old Firm game. The opener scored very early on because Celtic absolutely blitzed them to begin with. They were 3-0 up.
Mad.
Inside 12 minutes with Sutton, Petrov and Lambert all scoring. Moravchik with 2 assists and taking the corner for the first. But the first goal, Sutton was offside. He was basically, the goalkeeper was kind of further advanced than he was, so there wasn't 2 men between him and the line. And I liked a bit from the Celtic wiki just ignoring the rules of football, saying despite advocates' attempts to call the first goal offside, the video evidence proves otherwise. I had to look at this about 20 times. I'm like, am I missing something here? No, he's definitely offside. Shouldn't have counted.
That rule confuses everybody, including officials. I think it's one of these things that's so rare that when the goalkeeper's passed a couple of defenders in and somebody has to make an offside decision. I think, it confuses people. Like, people forget the rule, and you know what I mean, until it comes round again, and there's kind of debate about why it is. And so, yeah, it is one of these rare sort of instances in football that I think sometimes catches officials out.
Yeah, no, you're right. It does, and there's loads of you see fans all the time. If you ever watch like games in a pub when this happens, there's always somebody that's like, "No, look, he's onside."
Yeah,
It's like, "No, look,"
or
the goalie's
somebody
past him.
being off the pitch in that area or in the goal, and people thinking they're not active because they're off the pitch. That's a kind of similar one.
So this game, this was obviously the iconic Henrik Larsson chip. He does Bert Cotterman up like a complete fanny and then dinks it over Stefan Kloss. And Rangers nearly got themselves back into this game because they're 3-0 down, and they get a goal back, and then Rod Wallace. And it was a very tight decision.
It looks like his arm's offside. It looks like he's onside, but his arm is in an offside position. That sounded like John Hart's in there. It looks like his arm's... Is his arm offside? Surely that can't count. But yeah, other than his arm, I think he was in an offside position, it looked. But it was somebody hitting pause very quickly, and it was not the greatest footage of, obviously, going back to these days. So it's slightly blocky and stuff as well. So I can't say definitively, but it looks like they were harshly done by there. What a finish it is, by the way.
Yes, but so eventually Celtic go and gub them, and including in the game as well, it's Barry Ferguson getting sent off. Now, this is the main thing I want to talk about this game, because I found this news article called Reconstruction of What Really Happened on the Battle of Bothwell Bridge.
Here we go.
It's Barry Ferguson.
Written by Paul Larkin.
I don't know. I actually don't know where this has come from, because it's one of those free library ones. Well, wait, hang on. Let me see. Sunday Mail. So this comes from the Sunday Mail.
Okay.
So I'm going to skip ahead. So basically, Barry Ferguson was arrested after getting involved in a fracas with some Celtic fans in Bothwell, which is, for anybody who knows, kind of Glasgow and the surrounding areas, one of the nicer places to get into a big scrap with a bunch of fans for the local team. But I'm going to read a few excerpts from this paper report. We can reveal that Ferguson, 22, arrived at the hotel, at the Bothwell Bridge Hotel at 4 p.m. last Sunday, meeting up with Derek, 33, and 2 other friends. The group of friends meet at the hotel every week for a card game, and despite his red card at Celtic Park, which ended in a humiliating 6-2 drumming for the Ibrox side, Scottish international Ferguson was not prepared to miss out on his weekly fun. Blah, 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 blah. Ferguson was wearing a smart suit, shirt and tie when he arrived at the bar to meet his mates. It seemed many people had chosen the hotel for a quiet drink, believing it would offer that oasis of calm so rarely found in West Coast pubs on the day of an Old Firm clash, but it was not meant to be. A group of Celtic fans arrived at the hotel shortly after Ferguson's entourage, obviously intent on celebrating a famous victory over their ancient rivals. 2 of the men were wearing Celtic tops, and Ferguson, who spent the night drinking vodka and Red Bull, brilliant wee bit of information there, allegedly complained to staff about the men wearing team colours. The Celtic fans were asked to put on their jackets to cover the shirts and agreed, but insults were traded between the 2 groups. Then Ferguson, with apparent disregard for his own safety, jumped in a taxi to his Bothwell home and changed into his Rangers training gear. He then returned to the hotel bar and continued drinking with his brother and friends.
Fucking hell. Full kit wanker.
When the 2 men who had been asked to cover up their Celtic tops saw Ferguson's dress, they complained to management about him. Staff then asked him to change, but Ferguson replied, "I am a professional footballer. These are my working clothes." At that point, staff at the hotel asked both groups to leave, but trouble flared up again when they met outside the Jasmine House Chinese takeaway restaurant. What is certain is that Barry Ferguson received a nasty gash above his left eye. What is not so clear is whether he deserved it.
Oh my God. Not sure about that last thought.
Some local spoke of... that was in the paper, not me, but it was in the paper.
No, I know that.
Yeah, just want to make that clear for the audience. Some locals spoke of Derek, now playing with second division outfit Clydebank, pulling a heavy belt from his trousers while Barry kicked an older man. A fan then headbutted the younger brother, leaving him with a gash over his eye, which required 3 butterfly stitches. Derek was hit over the head by another fan brandishing a bottle of Buckfast, of course, West Coast. Various others joined in the fighting and paramedics were called to the scene. The police did not arrive until at least 20 minutes after the original fracas, by which time Ferguson and most others had involved in the scam had scattered. One of Ferguson's mates was lying left unconscious in the street, while 2 others needed hospital treatment.
Fucking hell.
They were all taken to separate hospitals to make sure the fight didn't continue. Tremendous.
Why do I feel like that's not even a sort of standalone incident that when it comes to Barry Ferguson in his early days?
Oh no, he was certainly like. I mean, I was going to say he matured. Then I remembered that we not long ago had a podcast about Boozegate when he basically ended his Rangers career when he was in his 30s. He didn't really matured that much, but I think he matured for the early Ferguson who, to be fair to him, kind of grew up.
This Barry Ferguson.
Yeah, exactly. Right, for those only listening on audio, Craig is doing the Vicky's sign on the
side of the face.
Cheek, on the side of the face. But yeah, like, to be fair, he did grow up like coming through the ranks at or at least was like starring the youth team as the side that had, you know, McCoist, Durant, Gaza, McCall, like that team, Richard Gough, the team that drinks together, quote, the team that drinks together wins together.
Yeah.
Yes, I think Sean said, he said, like, me and my team used to drink together all the time. We're fucking useless. Barely ever won a match. So yeah, he did kind of, and then I think Advocat did kind of change things, and he did mature to become at least somebody that wasn't getting involved in fights all the time, but yeah, not mature enough to ultimately end his Rangers career in disgrace. So that was the first 6-2 game. The other one, which unfortunately I'm going to talk about, is Hibs 6, Hearts 2. Craig, I don't know if you watched back the highlights for this one, but I obviously knew the second half was a bit of a battering. I didn't quite realise that Hearts were lucky not to be about 4-0 down, or at least 4 goals down, because they scored early on through Andy Kirk. 4 goals down at half time, because they were their goal was leading a charmed life even before Mixie Patalainen had scored those 2 on the edge of half time.
Yeah, you're right. And taking the lead in the first, made it even more bonkers, taking the lead in the first few minutes. But yeah, it was around that time where there's a few season period where we'd get battered, lose a few goals, a fair few goals, but our goalkeeper would still come out as man of the match. There were periods around then when like
there was a game at Celtic roughly around that time where we lost 6-1 and Niemi was man of the match.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and he was like our best player for a long time and that kind of thing. So I remember watching this game, and Mr. Hughes, which has undergone several name changes since in Gorgie, and I think I stormed out. I can't remember exactly how the scoring went. Was it maybe 5-1? I just like, right, I'm leaving, and just went home. And then by the time I got home, it was even worse, but we had scored one more as well. Just to, I don't know. It was just I
remember celebrating that late Colin Cameron goal because 6-2 is better than 6-1.
Yeah, but it was just horrible. It was Mixu Patalainen getting a hat trick, who was like a real. I mean, this I appreciate this is all from a Hearts perspective, but it was just a really hard, because he's like one of those players that you love to have on your team, but the opposition absolutely hates. So for him to absolutely run riot, and then I don't know. It was a grim night. I don't know. I can't really think of much to say about it objectively, rather than just my experiences of it.
So Patalainen was obviously great, scored a hat-trick. Everybody remembers Latape's goal and how instrumental he was in the game, but I think a lot of people maybe forget that John O'Neill and David Zitelli were both brilliant that night. John O'Neill especially, a player who was very good for him, a very effective midfielder who pretty much had his career ended at least kind of top flight level during a later derby, the 5-1 derby at Tynecastle, where I think he broke his collarbone in an early challenge in that game, and I don't think he ever really properly recovered enough to rediscover his form. He was kind of getting on a bit, to be fair, when that happened, so that was part of it. But he was brilliant, and I basically just kind of wanted to use this one to talk about this Hibs season in general, because I remember it obviously for what it was. It was a very good Hibs campaign. They finished third. They got the Scottish Cup final. This is a team with Frank Sozzi in it as well. But I didn't realise it was so kind of season of two halves. They had... Hibs had won 11 of their first 14 games, and the only defeat they suffered was at Celtic Park. Yet they only won 7 of the remaining 24. and only once in their last 11. So McLeish said afterwards, I read an article about this where it was basically like an oral history, or there were it was an article where a few players who played in this game had been interviewed. And McLeish said if we kept the whole team fit for the entire season, they would have been contenders. But I kind of looked through their squad. The majority of their bigger players played over 30 league games. So there wasn't a whole lot. It wasn't like they had many guys missing for 3 months at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason was that they tailed off so badly is that they were just a really old team. Their average age against Hearts was over 30. And in those days as well, you didn't have maybe as much big squads, or squad rotation was a thing that was starting to just kind of coming into English football and was proven quite controversial. Like, why would you rotate a squad? Just play your best players all the time. So I think Hibs would have kind of had that approach as well. So they just obviously got knackered in the second half of the campaign. And that was like, going back to McLeish, we mentioned earlier, kind of the hero of the show so far. He was like, Hibs started off the next season terribly as well. But he got the Rangers job. And he got the Rangers job at like the exact right time, because had Advocate hung on another couple of months, you wonder whether Rangers would have actually went to him, because Hibs were just, by that point, it would have got to almost like a year of football where Hibs were barely winning at all. So he was almost, because I do remember Hibs fans saying that towards the end of his Hibs stay, when he left for Rangers, they were like, good, we think you've done all you can, we need somebody else to come in. Which then initially turned into a disaster with it being Saucy, but eventually they recovered with Mowbray, etc.
The BBC article actually talks about the one about the match report, talks about because Dick Advocaat apparently said that he didn't see Hibs as title contenders, and the sort of the first half of the match report is about how Hibs are sticking it to Advocaat after, I think Rangers must have lost to St Johnstone earlier in the day, and then Hibs went to hammered Hearts. But yeah, but I don't really remember Hibs at all that season as being title contenders, like, and that'll be why, because they just collapsed in the second half of the season. You know, you can remember it's Aberdeen who maybe put up a bit more of a challenge, but it seemed like a bit longer. But yeah, Hibs. I don't have any particularly strong memories of Hibs challenging that season, but obviously they did for long enough for Advocaat to get a wee bit stressed about it, because I think Rangers were fourth at the time. So they were still 5 points behind Celtic, though. I don't think Celtic were ever in any danger, to be honest.
No, certainly not. Right, Andy, we'll stick with you, because we will see out this podcast by talking about what Scotland were up to this year in one game in particular. But before we get to that, you're going to tell us all about what was happening in the city of Discovery, particularly at Dens Park.
Yeah, well, this was the Ivano Benetti, the start of the revolution, in the Argentinian revolution in Dundee, which was much more short-lived, I guess, than people maybe expected at the time. But Ivano Benetti came in to replace Jockey Scott, who'd finished 7th the season before with Dundee. So, you know, fine for Dundee to finish 7th. But Benetti came in on the back of the Marr brothers, were the two men running Dundee at the time, and they'd brought in. It's a bit vague in terms of Giovanni Di Stefano, what his involvement actually was, and he's obviously a bit of a dodgy character. I always think when you talk about Di Stefano, who was a lawyer who allegedly represented a number of highly dubious individuals, that he's always liked it. Who's the person who you would say Di Stefano's most closely linked with, outside of sport, like what in his actual job? What would you say the name is?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. I only know him as being involved with Dundee.
Fair. Well, hopefully somebody out there is shouting the Warlord Arcan, because that's who, and it's always like the Warlord Arcan, who's like I can't remember what his actual real name was, but some sort of Serbian baddie from back in the past.
Pals with Mihailovic.
Yes, yeah, and it was anyway. So I'm getting off topic a wee bit, but he seemed to have an influence in terms of this revolution. That they brought Benetti in, who came in with his brother, and they basically completely overhauled the team. Most of the Scottish players went out; they mostly get binned. I think Rab Gordon was one of the few Scottish players that left, but was like sold on rather than they chose to kick out. He went to Celtic for $1.5 million.
Rab Douglas, you called him Rab Gordon.
Oh, Rab Douglas. Who did I say?
Rab Gordon.
Sort of composite of two big, tall Scottish goalkeepers there. Sorry, Rab Douglas. And they made 15 signings over the course of the season. So Georgian Nimzadze was the first one they brought in, and then some guy called Mark Robertson from Swindon was the last person in March the following year. But in between that, they had Fabian Caballero, they had Juan Sara, who ended up as top goal scorer with 15. Zurab Kizhnashvili, who went on to have a successful career elsewhere at Blackburn and various other places. Javier Artero, and then obviously the main one amongst that was Claudio Caniggia, who was basically generated all the headlines, but it was arguably sort of Juan Sara was the best signing, and then other players like Nimzadze and Caballero had the moments, and I think Nimzadze overall was pretty good.
Yeah, it was class.
But kind of weirdly, and maybe it was partly because of the number of players that they brought in, and there was a bit of dysfunction. The Scottish players who were left, who were a sort of weird mix of big Scottish centre halves like Stephen Tweed and Lee Wilkie, and then Gavin Ray and Willie Faulkner. I mean, it was like you can sort
Sean
of see
McSkimming. That was a name that's
Sean McSkimming was a weird one. Yes, yeah. He had an incredibly 90s name, still playing in the 2000s. There, Sean McSkimming. But so they had this sort of
went on to play for
of,
Atlanta Silverbacks after the spell at Dundee. Sorry, I'd never looked up where he went after this. Yeah,
notoriously well known for their gorillas.
It's probably one of those stats like when it comes to like tigers. Like there's more tigers who are like in captivity in America than there is in the world. It's probably true of silverback gorillas as well. There's more of them in Atlanta than there is going into private collectors than there is in the wild.
That's probably true. But yeah, I always thought Willie Faulkner was the kind of weird one out of those. Like the rest of them were all obviously pretty solid, sort of hard Scottish players generally. I can't really remember what Sean McSkimming was like, but the other three certainly, and Rab Douglas as well. But yeah, Willie Faulkner stands out as the one exception to that. But yeah, given the players that they had, they only finished a position above where they finished the season before, and maybe part of that was due to the split. That once they got into the top six, they ended up again playing were difficult teams, but they were just a bit of a basket case all season. They didn't really they weren't really consistent all year. And they always summed up by that the first game of the season where they were away at Fir Park. Seemed to hammer them, certainly going by the highlights. They seemed to hammer them for the first half. They went 1-0 up. They hit the post multiple times. Then Benetti himself got sent off for two wild lunges, and then they're hanging on, and then they end up winning with a sort of wonder solo goal towards the end. So it seemed like a nice summing up of that Dundee team generally.
Yeah.
But yeah, they for all those players, I think that's the thing that stands out about them. That they didn't do anything. They got to the fourth round of the Scottish Cup, the third round of the League Cup. They lost to St Mirren. And they finished sixth and got into the Intertoto, which they lost in the first round to a Serbian team, ironically the following year. So yeah, a kind of weird season overall, but more memorable for just the people they had than actually anything they did on the pitch.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of those kind of celebrated teams this millennium. It's just because it was just wild. Like it was just Dundee signed. They signed Claudio Caniggia, for Christ's sake. Still one of the weirdest transfers in Scottish football history, especially when he turned up and he was just, he was like good. He was still good.
Yeah, he's fucking class. Rangers signed him. Yeah, he's fucking class.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right, so let's, as I said, let's finish off by telling you what Scotland were up to in this season. It wasn't a particularly happy one for the national team, despite the fact that over the course of this campaign, they would only lose one game, and that was a friendly to Australia in the November. But this came during the World Cup qualifiers, and there was one game in particular which stood out, which came on March 24th, and it was a 2-2 draw with Belgium at Hampden. So they were in a qualifying group with Belgium, Croatia, San Marino, and Latvia. Now, Scotland would only end up, I think, losing one game. I think I'm right in saying. But this was the game that really cost them big, because Scotland were 2-0 up, thanks to Billy Dodds, 2-0 up at half-time. And the second one came about after Eric, let's go for the pronunciation of this. Eric de Flandre was sent off for a handball on the line. No idea whether that's accurate or not. So 2-0 up at half-time, at home, the other team down to 10 men, easy Aussie, 3 points. We drew it away to Croatia in our previous competitive game. So this is like, oh, tremendous. We're going to the World Cup. No bother. Unfortunately not. 2 headers from Mark Wilmots and Van Buyten drew it level, the latter coming 2 minutes into stoppage time. And in the end, ended up being a disaster for Scotland and Craig Brown because it finished 2 points behind Belgium and missed out on the playoffs as a result. So had they beaten Belgium, they would have finished ahead of them, would have made it to the playoffs. Croatia ended up topping the group and Scotland had no chance. And I'm fairly certain I'm right in saying that this was Craig Brown's last campaign as Scotland manager. So yeah, quite a very frustrating way to go out on. And when I mentioned this game, it was actually mentioned to me by Sean, like, you need to talk about this game. He says, I've barely ever been so furious leaving Hampden before than after that one. And yeah, it does seem quite Scottish to throw away a 2-goal lead to a team that because they drew in Belgium as well, so it's not like it was like they were fluky to be ahead at the break and to have that advantage over 10 men and to not see it out, like I said, just very, very Scottish, isn't it?
Yes, and interestingly, we've played them 6 times since and have neither won, drawn, nor scored a goal against them in that time. And we've conceded 19 times. So we've really not had a good time of it against Belgium since this game. We won the game before, as you mentioned, or did you? No, it was the game after we lost, I think you mentioned. But yeah, we won the game before, but since this draw, 2-0 is the best we've done against them.
Sorry, I said we drew in Belgium. Sorry, that's not correct. We drew in Croatia and we drew at home to Croatia as well. So we're undefeated against the group winners, but lost in Belgium and threw away this game. So that was what did it for this group.
Yeah, and I think it's also it was maybe still a period where we thought it's a matter of time before we're at a tournament again, and then we tried something else after Craig Brown and realised that there was no one else coming through. And so this was not only was this a sore point, this campaign never really got as good as this campaign for quite a while.
Yeah, because they brought in Vokes after this, and then it was... But also, it was not just Vokes, it was the fact that you even look at the teams for this game, like, still a lot of old players, like Colin...
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. There was nothing coming through. So it's partly, like, a lack of talent coming through and Craig Brown sticking with the same thing for a long time, which had worked for him, so... I don't know.
And just not a lot of talent coming through. But right, that'll do us. Thank you very much for listening to us. We'll just wrap this up in time for Andy to say goodbye, so he needs to leave.
Goodbye.
And say goodbye to Craig Cairns as well.
Cheers. See you later on, Fowler.
And I am Craig Fowler, and thank you for listening and watching, and join us again next time. Goodbye.